just want to knit all the things. All the things, but I can't knit them all at once. Fiber Junkies, welcome back to the Color Cauldron. I'm Johanna, the owner and dyer behind Potion Yarns and host of this podcast. Thank you for joining me today. If you are a returning viewer, I'm so glad you came back, and if you are a new viewer, welcome, welcome. We're going to take it easy a little bit this week with just a simple catch up on what I've been knitting lately. I haven't done one of these videos for a few weeks, partly because we had other things to do, like Saturday night at the movies, which was last weekend. If you missed last week's video, I highly recommend you go back and watch it, because it was a really good one with a fun video recommendation and some interesting themes that we pulled out of an old movie. And if you have enjoyed the Saturday night at the movies series, please let me know by leaving a comment below and telling me that you're enjoying it, because I'm having a really fun time with it, and I just want to make sure that you guys are enjoying it as well. I've mentioned on the podcast about a month ago, I mentioned that I was in a little bit of a slump with knitting. I just wasn't feeling motivated, and I just didn't want to do it. And this hasn't happened to me for a really long time. It has happened before, but not for a while. And this one lasted longer than my previous slumps, where I just feel like I didn't want to knit for a few days. Usually it only lasts for like a week or two. This one lasted for over a month, where I did knit a little bit in that time, but very, very little. I had a lot of days, most days in fact, when I didn't knit at all. When I did knit, it was very, very just like a row or two here and there, and I was having trouble getting excited or motivated about it. So I am happy to report that my knitting mojo is finally coming back. I still don't think I'm quite up to where I used to be, where I knit just like all the time for hours at a time. I'm finding that I can't knit for as long without feeling like I just need to put it down or do something else. But I think it is slowly but surely returning. I've seen a very steady increase in it over the last couple of weeks. So I'm happy that it is back, because I was really, really struggling without it for a while there. I was like, what am I gonna do? This is like my hobby and what I do when I'm watching TV, or what I do when I'm like waiting in line or on an airplane, and I don't know what to do without it. So I'm really relieved that it came back. So if you are going through a knitting slump as well, don't worry, it will probably come back. I guess I can't speak for everyone in all situations, but most likely it will come back. Sometimes we just need to take a little break and creatively rejuvenate ourselves. The bad thing is I am feeling like knitting now more, but I'm not feeling that rejuvenated as far as creatively. Like, I'm enjoying the knits that I've been doing, but I found it really difficult picking new projects when I get to the point that I'm ready to cast on something new. And I found it really difficult, like, feeling as inspired in picking out colors and stuff. So I'm still like kind of slowly getting that part back. It's coming back, but it's taking a little bit of time, and that's okay, you know. It's not fun, but sometimes we just have to go through that. All of life is cycles and ups and downs, right? So I've just come out of a downtime creatively. I have been dyeing yarn though in the meantime, restocking a lot of things, doing the yarn clubs, and then I am working on a new collection right now, so stay tuned for that. Hopefully in the next week or two I will have a release date for that. I'm still trying to finish up a last minute color that I'm tweaking, so new yarns coming. But I have been playing around with some really fun, bright colors for spring and summer. I've been feeling very inspired by warm weather and sunshine and really bright colors lately. So this month's yarn club for Doris Day, I won't show it to you because it hasn't shipped out yet, so I don't want to spoil the surprise. But this month's club color was a very bright, fun color, just to kind of liven it up and brighten things a little bit, because the last couple months we've done of our yarn club have been a little bit more sober and like rich jewel tones and kind of deeper shades and a little more subtle shades. And so this month we wanted to shake it up with something really, really bright and bold, and I'm glad we did. It made me feel very springy when I was dyeing it. So all right, so let's talk about what I have been knitting lately. The first thing is not something new, and I honestly I'm just going to show it really briefly and then we're going to move on, because the fact of the matter is I haven't actually worked on this very much lately. I started this over 2 months ago, and then I knit on it furiously for like a couple weeks, and then I hit my slump where I didn't want to knit anything. And so I picked it up once or twice in the middle of that slump, and I knit like a row or a half a row and would be like, I'm just not into this, and put it down again. So, and then the last several weeks I haven't even looked at it because, so this is, I guess this is a project that's been in time out. And that is my Shusui Shrug. I'm in the middle of a row right now, so I'm gonna have to show it to you on my circular needle all bunched up. It doesn't look awesome right now, but I am almost to the bottom of the body. Here is the top neckline up here. That's the inside or the wrong side. And I am now down to working towards the hem. I'm almost done with the body. The sleeves are on waste yarn because you put those, you knit from the top down, you put the sleeves on waste yarn or a holder, and then keep knitting the body, and then I'll go back and pick those up in a little bit. So yeah, I don't really have anything new to tell you, unfortunately, on this one. I'm not even going to go over the yarn colors I used right now because we've talked about them multiple times in the podcast, but I'm using all hand-dyed yarns. One of them is mine. It's an old club color. This bright tealy blue is an old club color. It's like white and teal and aqua. And then I am using some vocabulary yarns and some barnyard knits. And that's all I'm going to say on that. The next thing that I am knitting is a shawl. Actually, both of the next two projects that I'm going to show you is a shawl. Or both of them are shawls, I should say. And this one is getting really large, so it barely fits on my circular needle that I'm using to knit. You knit back and forth in rows, but I'm using a circular needle because there's a lot of stitches that I have to accommodate. And so it's all bunched up and hard to see right now, but I am finally getting around to knitting a shawl that's been on my queue on Ravelry for like years. Well, I say years, probably 2 years. And I didn't want to knit it right away because I don't have a lot of self-striping yarn. I actually only recently got to the point where I like self-striping yarn. I used to not like it at all. When I first discovered it, I wasn't a big sock knitter yet, and so I was just like, I don't really see the need for it. And then I started knitting socks, and my first couple pairs of socks were knit with self-striping yarn, but just like cheap stuff from, you know, the big chain craft stores. And I liked it okay, but I wasn't really hugely into the stripy socks look. And once I got really obsessed with socks, I very quickly moved into wanting to make more decorative socks. So ones that you needed more of a solid or a semi-solid for because they had intricate stitch work, like lots of lace or little tiny twisty cables and really cool little motifs. So if you had anything variegated or really, really stripy or bold color changes, you wouldn't be able to see the stitch patterns. So for a while, I just wasn't into self-striping yarn. And if I ever did use it, I used it strictly for socks, and I didn't do that very often. So I kind of just didn't worry about it for a lot of years, and then a couple years ago, I kept seeing really awesome hand knit socks, and a lot of them were made using indie dyed self-striping yarn, which is something I don't do as a dyer because it's quite a bit different setup, and you have to be very precise, and it's just not the way that I like to create. But I'm fascinated by the people who do like to create it, and I'm so grateful that there are indie dyers out there who love it and are really good at it. Some of them specialize in it. Other people do it as well as doing other types like semi-solids and speckles. And I much prefer to leave it to them because I'm just not great at it and it's just not my cup of tea. But I do like to knit with it on occasion for the right project. But I didn't really have a lot of it in my stash. In fact, I don't think I had any in stash. And so I was gifted this shawl pattern a couple years ago. And I was really excited because I had mentioned that I really loved this shawl pattern and I wanted to try this designer who I'd never knit anything from before. And I'll put a link to his pattern below. His name is Josh, and he is Sword of a Knitter. That's his website, and I think that might also be his Instagram handle, although I'm not positive. But I'll put a link to his pattern below, and you can look up his other designs. I highly recommend that you go to his Ravelry designer page and look through all of his patterns, because this is the only one that I've knit so far, but I have a whole bunch of his patterns on my favorites list and on my wish list because he's a very talented designer and his stuff is really, really cool. He has a very bold, masculine, slightly aggressive, like geometric kind of look. A lot of his designs work with color and geometry in a really cool way, and so he's got really cool color blocked shawls and really cool, he works with self-striping and variegated yarns really, really well, and I love his designs, and I think he just has a very unique perspective. So go check out his patterns. But this one is called Typhoon, And as you can see, maybe you don't realize this, but because I didn't when I first looked at it, I thought he was doing all of these as individual little colors. But this is designed to work with one self-striping skein and one solid skein. So I had to wait until I got some self-striping colors that were the right type of colors for me to wear in a shawl, because the first couple skeins that I looked at in my stash, I was like, those are not gonna look good when they're knit up. But the idea is you can use a variegated or a speckled yarn instead of the self-striping, but I really wanted this super graphic, bold motif that he had in his original sample. So I decided to use a self-striping yarn, and it gave me a good excuse to go buy a new yarn and try out a new to me dyer. So this is by Mud Punch, and the colorway was an exclusive, I think it was a limited edition. I'm not positive about that. You may still be able to get it, but the dyer behind Mud Punch Yarns got married last year, and these were the colors in her wedding. So this is called Mud Punch's Wedding, and I just thought it was really cute. It's like this really bright sky blue, which is what I fell in love with, and white, and this really great like Kelly green. And then this, in different lighting, it looks different. So I thought it was black when I first got it in the mail, but it's actually a deep navy blue. It's a really, really dark, deep navy blue, but you can see like in natural sunlight or in a really good studio light, you can see that it's actually navy, not black. But in low lighting, it's kind of cloudy and overcast today, and I'm just using the natural light from the window today instead of my studio lights. So sometimes it looks more black than navy in lower lighting and in dim lighting or in artificial lighting, but it is actually a navy, and I like that. And then I am using that, my solid color that I picked out is from Knit Picks, and I'm almost done, so it's all like lovely and flat. But this is the Knit Picks Stroll yarn, so it's just like their sock weight superwash merino. I think it's superwash merino and nylon, maybe? I think that's right. But it's like their sock yarn, and you can buy 50-gram balls. So I got 2 of the 50-gram balls in this eggplant color, this really deep purple. And I really liked how the purple sets off like the blue and white and green, and even the navy, like it's more of a subtle contrast there because those are both kind of dark colors, but I really liked it. And I'm loving how this is knitting up, very graphic and bold, and you see the little sections of color. And my favorite thing about it is it uses garter stitch, which I love for just like easy, simple TV or reading and knitting. I really enjoy having a garter stitch or a stockinette, like really easy project on my needles at all times, if at all possible, because I like to have something that when I have a really bad headache or I'm just really tired and not feeling like thinking that much and I don't want to do anything hard, or I just need like a break from maybe I've been knitting a really hard color work chart or something and I need to just take a break, I really like to relax with just a little bit of garter stitch or stockinette easy simple knitting. And so I always try to have like a pair of vanilla socks on the needles or a garter stitch shawl or something like that. This shawl uses a lot of short rows as well, so if you're not comfortable with short rows, this would be a really good way to start learning them because they're not super complicated. He gives really clear instructions, and this shawl pattern uses German short rows, which I didn't learn until I'd been doing short rows for a couple of years, and I love them. They're so easy and so great, and they look fantastic in garter stitch. You don't see the rejoining after the short row at all. I just think this is a simple, easy pattern that even a beginner could do because there's no complicated stitch work. The short rows are pretty easy and well explained, and it's only 2 colors, and it's just garter stitch. It's so great and so easy, and there's a few yarn overs in there as well, but anybody can do that if you know how to knit. So I love that. I highly recommend it. Next, I want to show you the brand new shawl that I just cast on this last weekend. I have decided to knit another Stephen West shawl, which if you've been following the podcast for a while or if you know me at all, you will know that I love Stephen West patterns. I don't know very many people who don't. I have seen online some comments in some very large international knitting groups where there are some people who are like, I just don't get it. I just don't like his style. And that's 100% okay. If you're one of those people, totally fine. We all have our different styles, and there's a lot of things out there that I see people knit and crochet that I'm like, really? Really? Not my style. I would never want to make that. So I love that there's so many different patterns, and places like Ravelry give us so many different options and styles and types of patterns. I also heard someone the other day talking about how she would never knit a shawl because what a waste of time and yarn, because it's not like anybody ever really wears their shawls, and they just don't seem like it's a good use of all that yardage. It seems like you should be doing sweaters and socks or something like that. And I get what she was saying, but as a devoted shawl knitter, I was like, what is wrong with you? Totally okay if you're not a Stephen West fan, but I am a diehard Stephen West fan. I do think that some of his designs occasionally get a little avant-garde for me. Sometimes I'm like, would I really ever wear that? But the majority of the time, I really love his stuff, especially his shawls. He makes incredible shawls, and he has such, talk about a bold style. It's just totally avant-garde, and his style reminds me of, I used to work in a vintage clothing store, which was like the best job ever, and I loved it. And the store that I worked in, which unfortunately is out of business now, had a really large selection of unique and designer kind of different things. I don't know how to describe it exactly, but different pieces of clothing and just really avant-garde, unusual stuff. And she had a whole collection in the shop of high-priced vintage, so they didn't move super fast in Kansas City, but we did sell some of them. But we had a small section of very high-priced 1980s Japanese designers, the really avant-garde, way out there, crazy. If you don't know the type of style I am referring to, just look up 1980s Japanese avant-garde vintage, and you'll see some great images. There were several European buyers and Japanese buyers that would come over to America, and they would hit up several shops in different cities around the country buying vintage, like really high-end vintage, and then they take it back to Europe and sell it crazy expensive to people over there. So we actually used to supply furs to a guy that always sold our fur coats in Italy, like vintage furs. And then we had this one guy who always came, and he always wanted the 1980s Japanese designer stuff that he could then take to like, I think Germany and Italy and sell them over there. And so I remember thinking when I worked there, it was really cool being around these like designer names and these like pieces of fashion history that are like crazy expensive. But I remember a couple times being like, I would never wear this stuff. It's so over the top. Like, it's clearly an art piece, but it's one of those things where you're like, this would look good on the catwalk or hanging in a gallery, but nobody wants to wear that out, like, right? And I'm a much more practical vintage collector. I do love to collect vintage, and I do have a few pieces that are just show pieces that I don't really wear much. I just love being able to own them, and sometimes we'll display them around my home, but I only have like 2 of those. And that's because I believe that vintage should be used and worn, and it's clothing, it's utilitarian, but it's also fashion. So I just never got into that kind of stuff. But that was a very long tangent to explain to you how I feel about Stephen West's designs. Sometimes I'm like, that looks really cool, but I feel like it only looks cool in a crazy like fashion photo shoot or hanging in a gallery or in a yarn shop, but I would never wear it. But a lot of his stuff is actually highly wearable, and if you haven't ever tried one of his patterns, I suggest you start with a shawl, because shawls you can be a little more crazy with because they're an accessory, but you can still have a really simple, elegant outfit, and it's not as intimidating as wearing like a crazy weird sweater with a 3rd armhole or something. So I recommend trying his shawls because he really does have a lot that are very easy to wear, and not everything is super avant-garde. And I highly recommend clicking through the Projects tab on several of his shawls, because you'll get a really good feel for how color choices affect the overall look and how avant-garde it is. Part of Stephen West's shtick, and the thing that makes him so popular, is his unashamed use of really bright, crazy, and sometimes even clashing colors within a design. He uses a lot of colors. He uses very bright colors. He uses clashy colors or very high contrast colors, and that's kind of his thing. And which is another thing that I love about him, because I love bright colors as well. But I love being able to look through the different projects and see how other people have chosen more sedate or more subdued or more low contrast colors on some of his designs, and they achieve a completely different result. It's still beautiful and amazing. It's just very different, more conservative, more elegant and pared down, a little bit easier to wear for some people, especially if you're not really into neons and bright colors. And then you'll see other people just go crazy wild with color, and it's really fun to see how everybody puts together different colors. So I am doing a Stephen West shawl. I've knit several of his patterns before, but this one is a new one to me. This is the Smocket shawl. There's a link below so you can go check out the projects page and see how this looks. He did his in really brighter, more intense colors on his project page, but I was really captivated by the pictures of Kristen from Vine Yarns. She knit this shawl, and she used some beautiful singles yarn from a few different indie dyers, and she had created a really like dark, almost gothy kind of feel to it. Like it was all very like dark wines and grays and blacks and eggplanties, and I don't know, it was just more of like they're more her colors. If you've ever watched her podcast or you know anything about her, she loves mauve, which she calls mauve, and she loves a little bit more the kind of dark, edgy grays and maroons and those kinds of colors. She's not as much the bright kind of color person. She's a little more dark, deep, borderline gothy, but not super goth. And I actually love those colors as well from time to time in certain projects. I just also love brights. So usually I try to stick more with like bright colors and crazy stuff because I love the vibe that Stephen's patterns give out, but I was captivated by her version of the Smocket shawl, and I was trying to knit all from stash yarn. So I got really excited when I found 3 skeins of different yarns that I thought went beautifully together. We'll see how they knit up, but so far I'm loving it. So the first one, my color A, is from a dyer called Yarn Ink, which I've never tried before. I've been stashing this yarn for 2 or 3 years. So Yarn Ink is the dyer, and the colorway is called Grunge. And it's just this really cool blend. It's just a variegated hand-dyed yarn. It's a really cool blend of like grassy yellowy green and kind of a soft pale aqua-y blue and white and gray, grungy gray. It's just really cool, and I'm liking it a lot. It is a merino cashmere and nylon, so I love how that cashmere puts that extra tinge of softness and prettiness in it. So then my next color, both of my next 2 colors are from Shauna over at the Hive at Honey Girl Farms, or that's her Facebook group, I believe. Honey Girl Farms is the dyer. She's also from Missouri, so she's my neighbor, but not in Kansas City. She lives closer to St. Louis, kind of in between St. Louis and Kansas City. And so I will put a link to her shop below as well so you can check her out, because she's a fantastic dyer, an absolutely lovely and sweet person. I got the wonderful opportunity to meet her in person at her trunk show here in Kansas City last summer, and I got to dye her hair while she was in town, and we just had a blast hanging out and talking yarn and hair dye and all kinds of fun things. She does a lot of really cool yarns based on Outlander and fantasy films, Game of Thrones, Doctor Who, things like that. So if you like that kind of like nerdy fan fiction, sci-fi kind of stuff, check out her stuff because she has a lot of those, but she's also got some other colors too. And all of her colors to me feel they're in that same kind of vein I was talking about with Vine. Not necessarily gothy, but they just have this almost like, I hate to say country because that makes me think of like country blue, but this really like natural kind of feel. Like you can tell she's very inspired by wildflowers and stones and really pretty things in nature, because I feel like her yarns look like something you'd find blooming in the forest. And that's a high compliment for me. They look really, really cool. I love how so many of her yarns have like this cool mossy green or a really pretty like babbling brook blue kind of a thing. She's just got a really cool sense of colors. She also does really bright colors too, but most of the ones I'm attracted to from her shop tend to be the ones that look like wildflowers. So this is one of her yarns that I'm going to be using next in the colorway. So this is kind of, I don't know if it's officially a fade or if it's just kind of similar, but you use 3 different colors and you sort of like blend them into each other as you go. So that's going to be my second color. And I believe, if I remember right, I lost the ball band, but I think this one was called Lallybrock, which is from Outlander, which I am reading right now for the first time, by the way. I just started reading the Outlander books and I'm already on book 2. Don't like it as much as book 1, but I'm going to stick it out to the end and see where we go. I'm intrigued enough to see where the story goes from here. And then the third color I'm using is also from Shauna at Honey Girl Farms. I am just obsessed with this beautiful wine burgundy kind of a colorway. Both of these are a speckled yarn that I got from her. This one is called the Seventh Doctor from the Doctor Who series. I think she did several Doctor Who yarns a while back. So I can't wait to start knitting with those. I still have a ways to go with color A before I can start adding in the next color. But this is a cool shawl because you knit it sideways. So you start down here at this little point and then you increase as you go. So this is going to be like the side of the shawl, and then there's a border that you'll pick up that has the smocking stitch along it that will be kind of the bottom of the shawl. So it's kind of like a crescent shaped shawl. It's really cool, and I am enjoying how simple and easy it is. There is a 4-row repeating pattern once you get into the increases that you just do over and over, so it's pretty easy to memorize once you get going. And just some really easy stitches, you know, just simple knits and purls. There's no lace or anything in it yet. I know you're supposed to read ahead in the pattern before you cast it on. I don't do that very often. And if I do, I typically do it more on garments, not so much in shawls. But I usually don't even do it with garments. Let's be honest, I'm really bad about that. I just kind of go for it and see what happens. So I haven't looked at the border part yet to see what you're doing for the edging, but so far it's pretty simple, easy. So it's really good like travel knitting. I was just on a plane last weekend and I took it on the plane, and that's where I started it actually, and was knitting it on the plane, and was like, this is a really easy, nice thing because I don't have to keep consulting the pattern all the time, so I don't have to keep shuffling around and bothering my neighbors. I can just sit here and knit, and it's really simple, really easy, relaxing, but a little more interesting than just plain old garter stitch. So it's a good one. I highly recommend it. So I only have one more thing that I want to show you today, and then we'll call it a day. This is a new acquisition that I got for myself, just for fun. I actually got a new crochet hook, and I'm not a big crocheter. I keep talking about how we're going to do crochet on the podcast, and then I still haven't done anything. Oh, I'm terrible about that. But I really do intend to crochet again. I actually used to crochet a lot more than I do now. I never did it a ton. Knitting has always been my first love. It was the first thing I learned, and it's the thing I do the most often. And I prefer the look of the stitches and the fabric, and I prefer the 2 needles versus the 1 usually, and I prefer that because it doesn't make my hands hurt the way crochet does after a while. So I've just always liked knitting better. But I did learn to crochet a couple years after I learned to knit, and for a while there I was doing a ton of crochet, and I loved how fast and easy it was, and I loved how easy it was to teach myself new things, but I kind of slacked off over time, and now I only crochet randomly once every year or two. So I've been searching for a new crochet project, and I think I even mentioned it on the podcast a couple months ago, and then I know I mentioned it like on my Instagram feed, and people gave me great suggestions, and I did nothing about it. So I'm sorry that I was so terrible about this. But I did want to show you guys that I got a new crochet hook. I did a giveaway on Instagram recently, not on my feed, but I participated by donating some skeins of yarn to a giveaway that another indie professional was doing. And she makes custom crochet hooks. So, like sculpts them out of, I'm guessing polymer clay. I'm not sure exactly what she uses, but she takes little mass-produced hooks, and then she makes the handle part, and she has a whole bunch. She does like, she had Nightmare Before Christmas ones that were really cute. You could get Jack Skellington or Sally, the girl. She had ones based on like Friends and Doctor Who and Harry Potter. She has a whole bunch of Harry Potter ones. And so I decided that she had offered if I ever wanted one to let her know, and she could even do custom work, which she does have a listing in her Etsy shop for a custom hook. You can give her ideas and she'll design one for you. But I ended up going with one that I saw in her shop already because I liked the mermaids so much and I decided that was the one I wanted. So she made me this really great mermaid crochet hook. I love it. And it's fun because with all of her crochet hooks, you pick out your design or you send her a custom, like a picture or something of a custom one that you want done. And then she lets you pick the size of the crochet hook that you want. And she even has 2 different brands, so you can pick the different brand if you want. And then she makes it for you, and this is what you get. I have never worked with a fancy crochet hook before. I've always just used the simple little like mass-produced ones you can get at like Joann's and Hobby Lobby, because again, I don't crochet as often, so I'm not gonna spend a ton of money. Like, I'm really picky about my knitting needles. I'm not super picky about my crochet hooks because I don't use them as often. And so I generally just get the simple basic ones, and I've never had any like handles or any of those like cushion things that you can add onto your crochet hook. So I've only ever used the like really skinny ones. And I'm hoping that this one, it's so fat that when I got it, I was like, can I even get used to crocheting like this? I think I can. I think that this might actually hurt my hand less, so I'm really excited to try it out because I struggle so much with, like, after only 30 minutes or so of crocheting, I'm like, gosh, my hand is really hurting. So doing like a couple hours during a movie can get rough, and I can do it, but it is hard. And so this feels a lot softer, and it's not as small, so my hand isn't like as tight and clenched. So I'm thinking, I've avoided the big fat ones before because they just look so fat and unwieldy, but now I'm like, I feel like this might actually hurt my hand less. So I'm eager to try it out and see how it goes. But I will put a link to Yarn Weave Company below so that you can check out her Etsy shop and go give her some love, maybe order a hook. They're really surprisingly priced. I feel like for how much work she puts into them, they're very affordably priced, and she does really great work. And again, she does custom things too, so you could always get one that looks like your dog or something. But I liked the mermaid. I thought they were cute. My second choice was probably going to be one of the Harry Potter ones because she had some really cute Harry Potter ones as well. So that's what I'm needing to find a project for. If you have any great suggestions for a really wonderful crochet project, I'm probably looking... I'm not adverse to garments. I love knitting sweaters and garments. I tend to like crocheted garments a lot less, but I'm not adverse to them. I do have a couple sweaters and tops that I've made with crochet before that I really like. So I would totally be down for trying that if you have a great, if you have a great suggestion. If not, I really like accessories. So let me know what kind of crochet accessories you really like. If you have a pattern name or anything, drop it below. If you just have general suggestions or designers that you like that do crochet, drop those below as well. Leave me a comment and tell me what you think I ought to break in the new crochet hook with. I'm excited to try it out. Okay, I hope you guys have a great rest of your weekend. Thanks for tuning in again, and I will see you next week, but it is now time to cast off. Love you.